This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, Chief Anchor George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening. We're coming on the air right now because President-elect Joe Biden is set to address the nation right now after today's Electoral College vote cemented his victory over President Trump.
Representing the certified winner, cast their votes for President and Vice President of the United States in an act just as old as our nation itself. And once again, in America, the rule of law, our Constitution, and the will of the people prevailed. Our democracy pushed, tested, threatened, proved to be resilient, true, and strong. The Electoral College votes, which occurred today, reflect the fact that even in the face of a public health crisis unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetimes, the people voted. They voted in record numbers. More Americans voted this year than have ever voted in the history of the United States of America. Over 155 million Americans were determined to have their voices heard and their votes counted. And the start of this pandemic, this crisis, many were wondering how many Americans would actually vote at all. But those fears proved to be unfounded. We saw something very few predicted, even thought possible. The biggest voter turnout in the history of the United States of America. A number so big that this election now ranks as the clearest demonstration of the true will of the American people. One of the most amazing demonstrations of civic duty we've ever seen in our country. It should be celebrated, not attacked. More than 81 million of those votes were cast for me and Vice President-elect Harris. That, too, is a record. More than any ticket has received in the history of America. It represents a winning margin of more than 7 million votes over the number of votes cast for my opponent. Together, the Vice President-elect Harris and I earned 306 electoral votes, well exceeding the 270 electoral votes needed to secure victory. 306 electoral votes is the same number of electoral votes that Donald Trump and Vice President Pence received when they won in 2016. Excuse me. At the time, President Trump called the Electoral College tally a landslide. By his own standards, these numbers represented a clear victory then, and I respectfully suggest they do so now. If anyone didn't know before, they know now. What beats deep in the hearts of the American people is this: democracy. The right to be heard, to have your vote counted, to choose leaders of this nation, to govern ourselves. In America, politicians don't take power. People grant power to them. The flame of democracy was lit in this nation a long time ago. And we now know nothing, not even a pandemic or an abuse of power, can extinguish that flame. And as the people kept it aflame, so too did courageous state and local officials and election workers. American democracy works because America makes it work at a local level. One of the extraordinary things we saw this year was that everyday Americans, our friends and our neighbors, often volunteers, Democrats, Republicans, independents, demonstrating absolute courage. They showed a deep and unwavering faith in and a commitment to the law. They did their duty in the face of a pandemic. And then they could not and would not give credence to what they knew was not true. They knew this election was overseen by them, it was honest, it was free, and it was fair. They saw it with their own eyes, and they wouldn't be bullied into saying anything different. It was truly remarkable, because so many of these patriotic Americans are subject to so much, enormous political pressure, verbal abuse, and even threats of physical violence. While we all wish that our fellow Americans in these positions will always show such courage and commitment to free and fair elections, it is my sincere hope we never again see anyone subjected to the kind of threats and abuse we saw in this election. It's simply unconscionable. We owe these public servants a debt of gratitude. They didn't seek the spotlight. You know, and our democracy survived because of them, which is proof, once more, that it's everyday Americans infused with honor, character, and decency that is the heart of this nation. You know, in this election, their integrity was matched by their strength, independence, and the integrity of our judicial system. In America, when questions are raised about the legitimacy of any election, those questions are resolved through the legal processes. And that's precisely what happened here. The Trump campaign brought dozens and dozens and dozens of legal challenges to test the result. They were heard again and again. And each of the times they were heard, they were found to be without merit. Time and again, President Trump's lawyers presented arguments to state officials, state legislatures, state and federal courts, and ultimately to the United States Supreme Court twice. They were heard by more than 80 judges across this country, and in every case, no cause or evidence was found to reverse or question or dispute the results. A few states went for recounts. All the counts were confirmed. The results in Georgia were counted 3 times. Didn't change the outcome. The recount conducted in Wisconsin actually saw our margin grow. The margin we had in Michigan was 14 times the margin President Trump won that state by 4 years ago. Our margin in Pennsylvania was nearly twice the size of the Trump margin 4 years ago. And yet, none of this has stopped baseless claims about the legitimacy of the results. Even more stunning, 17 Republican attorneys general and 126 Republican members of the Congress actually signed on to a lawsuit filed by the state of Texas. That lawsuit asked the United States Supreme Court to reject the certified vote counts in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This legal maneuver was an effort by elected officials and one group of states to try to get the Supreme Court to wipe out the votes of more than 20 million Americans in other states, and to hand the presidency to a candidate who lost the Electoral College, lost the popular vote, and lost each and every one of the states whose votes they were trying to reverse. It's a position so extreme, we've never seen it before. A position that refused to respect the will of the people, refused to respect the rule of law, and refused to honor our Constitution. Thankfully, a unanimous Supreme Court immediately and completely rejected this effort. The court sent a clear signal to President Trump that there would be no part of an unprecedented assault on our democracy. Every single avenue was made available to President Trump to contest the results. He took full advantage of each and every one of those avenues. President Trump was denied no course of action he wanted to take. He took his case to Republican governors and Republican Secretary of State, as he criticized many of them, to Republican state legislatures, to Republican-appointed judges at every level. And in a case decided after the Supreme Court's latest rejection, a judge appointed by President Trump wrote, quote, "This court has allowed the plaintiff the chance to make his case, and he has lost on the merits," end of quote. Lost on the merits. Even President Trump's own cybersecurity chief, overseeing our elections, said it was the most secure election in American history, and summarily was let go. Let me say it again. His own cybersecurity chief, overseeing this election, said it was the most secure in American history. You know, respecting the will of the people is at the heart of our democracy, even when we find those results hard to accept. But that's the obligation of those who've taken on a sworn duty to uphold the Constitution. 4 years ago, when I was a sitting vice president of the United States, it was my responsibility to announce the tally of the Electoral College votes in the joint session of Congress that voted to elect Donald Trump. I did my job. And I'm pleased, but not surprised, by the number of my former Republican colleagues in the Senate who have acknowledged already the results of the Electoral College. I thank them, and I'm convinced we can work together for the good of the nation on many subjects. That's the duty owed to the people, to our Constitution, to our history. You know, in this battle for the soul of America, democracy prevailed. We, the people, voted. Faith in our institutions held. The integrity of our elections remains intact. And now it's time to turn the page, as we've done throughout our history, to unite, to heal. As I said in this campaign, I will be president for all Americans. I'll work just as hard for those of you who didn't vote for me as I will for those who did. There's urgent work in front of us. Getting this pandemic under control and getting the nation vaccinated against this virus. Delivering immediate economic help so badly needed by so many Americans who are hurting today. And then building our economy back better than it ever was. In doing so, we need to work together to give each other a chance to lower the temperature. And most of all, we need to stand in solidarity as fellow Americans, to see each other, our pains, our struggles, our hopes, and our dreams. We're a great nation. We're good people. We may come from different places, hold different beliefs, but we share in common a love for this country, a belief in its limitless possibilities. For we, the United States of America, has always set the example for the world for a peaceful transition of power. We'll do so again. I know the task before us won't be easy. It's tempered by the pain so many of us are feeling. Today, our nation passed a grim milestone, 300,000 deaths due to this COVID virus. My heart goes out to each of you in this dark winter of the pandemic, about to spend the holidays and the new year with a black hole in your hearts, without the ones you loved at your side. My heart goes out to all of you who have fallen in hard times through no fault of your own, unable to sleep at night, staring at the ceiling, and weighed down by the worry of what tomorrow will bring for you, and equally important for your family. But we've faced difficult times before in our history. I know we'll get through this one, but together. That's how we get through it, together. So as we start the hard work to be done, may this moment give us the strength to rebuild this house of ours upon a rock that can never be washed away. As in the prayer of St. Francis, for where there is discord, union, where there is doubt, faith, where there is darkness, light. This is who we are as a nation. This is the America we love. And that is the America we're going to be. So thank you all. May God bless you. And may God protect our troops and all those who stand watch over our democracy. Thank you.
Just a couple of hours after the Electoral College awarded Joe Biden 306 electoral votes, enough to make him president-elect, as you see him give a hug to his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, there. The president-elect comes out and says the will of the American people has prevailed in about a 15-minute address where he repeatedly cleared his throat, seemed to be fighting a bit of a cough or a cold, and discussed how record numbers of Americans have voted during this pandemic, how he and Kamala Harris received more votes than any ticket in history, a decisive rebuke to the efforts of President Trump over the last couple of weeks to try to overturn this election. I want to bring in Mary Bruce, who's been covering the Biden campaign from Washington, D.C. right now. The president-elect really seemed to be reaching out to those voters out there in the country who believe this election was rigged, who've bought President Trump's notion that there was somehow fraud involved in this election. He spoke directly to them with facts.
Yeah, and George, Joe Biden is very clearly trying to close this divisive chapter in our nation's history and turn the page, speaking over and over again, as we have throughout this his entire campaign, about the need to bring the country together and to heal, reaching out to all Americans, not just those who supported him. He knows that he has a real challenge ahead of him here, especially as President Trump and many of his supporters view Joe Biden as illegitimate, given the president's repeated false claims and efforts to overturn the election results. And what really struck me about those remarks was just how forceful Joe Biden was in his comments about the president. I think that those are some of the strongest remarks we've heard from him yet throughout this really remarkable, divisive 6-week period since the election. Joe Biden systematically just tore apart the president's argument here, noting that he took every legal avenue, every possible avenue in front of him to try and fight these results, to try and fight the will of the people here, and yet he failed at every turn. And Joe Biden is saying, look, even if you do support the president, that Biden will be your president going forward. But that is a lot easier said than done, getting all of Trump's supporters to now believe in and back a Biden administration.
Reminded everybody that 4 years ago, he actually presided over the Senate as vice president when the votes were counted for Donald Trump in the Senate. And Mary, I guess one of the questions right now is you've seen well over 100 Republicans in the House support the president's lawsuits going to the Supreme Court. You've seen Republican senators reluctant to acknowledge the president-elect Biden is indeed the president-elect. Is that starting to change in the wake of the Electoral College vote today?
A little bit of change. But, George, the majority of Republicans still have refused to admit that Joe Biden will be the next president. And many of them have been pointing to the Electoral College, giving them some cover in making that argument. Well, that cover is now gone. And so they are going to have to come out and face the reality that Joe Biden won this election. We have tonight seen some cracks in that Republican armor, some top Republicans coming out and acknowledging the reality here. But overwhelmingly, the majority of Republicans still aren't willing to go there, or aren't willing, even if they are willing to acknowledge that Biden will win, they aren't willing to say to Trump, Mr. President, this fight is over. And it just goes to show that the Republican Party is Donald Trump's party. Donald Trump has a very strong grip on the Republican Party. And even if privately some may have been willing to acknowledge that Biden in fact won this election, they have not been willing to do so publicly yet, many for fear that President Trump could retaliate. But we did see this really remarkable moment today, George. Paul Mitchell of Michigan, a Republican, coming out and saying he is leaving the party over the way that they have responded to this election, saying that his colleagues' refusal to admit Biden's win was, quote, demoralizing and disgusting. He said, if you can't admit you've lost, you shouldn't be in leadership.
Whether they acknowledge it or not, Joe Biden will be president on January 20th. He will take the oath of office at noon. The Electoral College voted today 306 electoral votes for Joe Biden, certified today. That's actually 2 more than Donald Trump ended up getting back in 2016. We're going to go back to our regular programming right now. Continuing coverage of this will be on ABC News Live. Have a good night.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Our thanks to George, and welcome back. Our coverage continues right here on ABC News Live. And just to recap, tonight the Electoral College confirmed what state officials across the country have been telling us for weeks now. President-elect Joe Biden won the election. Electors from each state met today and voted in line with the result in their specific state. California officially put Biden over the edge late this afternoon, and just moments ago, the last state, Hawaii, finalized its electoral vote. So the final margin is President-elect Biden 306, President Trump 232. Coincidentally, President Trump beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 by that same margin, 306 to 232. Which Biden did point out tonight. Today's electoral vote comes after repeated and baseless claims from the president about fraud that were not found to have any merit in courts of law, judge after judge finding no evidence of any widespread fraud. And tonight, Biden really made that case. He laid out for the American people this attempt to really establish legitimacy of his victory in this election. He went point by point, citing the 2 attempts with the Supreme Court to try to overturn the election results, the nearly 80 cases that went before judges that all dismissed or threw out the cases outright. He even at one point went specifically to Pennsylvania, talking about how they more than doubled the margin of victory there compared to Trump's win over Clinton in 2016. So let's start off with Rachel Scott. Rachel, wanted to get your reaction to tonight.
Make no mistake about it, Lindsay, this was a blistering smackdown of President Trump's failed attempts to try and overturn an election that he overwhelmingly lost. This was some of the strongest language that we have heard from President-elect Joe Biden since he won this election. And it really is the moment that President Trump has tried to fight from happening. For 6 weeks now, the president has been fighting this in court. 50 cases lost. You have states counting votes, recounting them, counting them again. Election workers in Georgia keeping that hand tally of every single vote, once again certifying Joe Biden's victory there. You had the president's refusal to concede an election that he lost cause a 3-week delay where Biden's team was not even able to contact federal agencies and begin to work with, Operation Warp Speed or even the White House coronavirus task force because President Trump had refused to concede an election that he has lost. But I think what is notable tonight, Lindsay, is the silence that we are hearing overwhelmingly from Republican leadership. You had 126 Republicans in the House that signed on to that failed lawsuit in the Supreme Court to try and toss out millions of votes. The Supreme Court rejected 2 cases in just 1 week. And tonight we really aren't hearing much from them. We are seeing a few small cracks. Mary Bruce mentioned that Paul Mitchell, the Republican congressman out of Michigan, saying that he's leaving the party, calling it disgusting that more Republicans have not spoken up. We have heard from Lamar Alexander, Senator John Thune, but especially now as Republicans move towards trying to secure the Senate, trying to make sure that Republicans win in a state like Georgia, where 2 runoffs are going to decide who keeps control of the Senate. They are stuck in this political pickle where they have been saying for weeks now that the election was rigged, but they are also going to try and be encouraging their base, encouraging the president's supporters to try and get out and vote. And at this point, I think what we heard from Biden tonight was that democracy was tested, he said. He said it was pushed. He says it was threatened, but it proved to be resilient. And he did make a plea to Republicans tonight to recognize reality, to come to terms with the fact that he won this election by more than 7 million votes and 306 electoral votes, Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Rachel Scott. Let's now bring in Terry Moran. Terry, it seems like the president's hands are tied. I mean, what other options does he have left to contest the outcome of this election?
Well, the election's decided by the American people in their votes. He doesn't really have any more legal options. He has the possibility that he could get Congress, his allies in Congress, to reject this declaration by the Electoral College that Joe Biden won. That's not going to happen. But what he wants to do is try to delegitimize and even destroy Joe Biden's presidency before it begins and stake a claim, a kind of loyalty test for the Republican Party going forward. The question will be for candidates, for office holders, do you believe the 2020 election was rigged? There are polls that show upwards of 3/4 of Republicans agree with that. Now, that may just be a tribal identification. It's their team. They want to side with their team. But President Trump, Donald Trump, will want to keep stoking those fires to keep his leadership of that party, to keep his grip on it. But one of the things we heard was a kind of antidote to that kind of politics tonight. Joe Biden began his remarks upon the Electoral College voting him next president of the United States by emphasizing how it was our neighbors, it was our own local officials, the decentralized nature of the election that will put him in the White House come January, that it was really that. The heart of the American democracy, he said, which is the strength of character and the decency of ordinary Americans who did their jobs. Those people who were working the polls, at risk of getting coronavirus. Those people who counted the votes, even while there were people screaming that they were criminals or trying to get in. Those people who then recounted them. Those elected officials, Republican and Democrat, who certified the votes in the 50 sovereign states. And all those judges, state and federal, Republican and Democrat, that Joe Biden mentioned in his speech, they all come from somewhere. We don't have a one-party state that can just seize control of the electoral machinery of the entire country. It is decentralized, as President-elect Biden said, and we count on each other to do the right thing. And this election now confirmed as free, fair, and true by those certifications of the 50 states, by the Electoral College, by the judges against those charges of fraud, so that really for any Republican who now says this is not a true result, they're really going against not just the process of democracy and the laws of the democracy, but the people themselves who vindicated that process and those laws through this very divisive process. I think it was important for Joe Biden to come out, not just try to extend the olive branch to Republicans, saying he will be the president of all the people, but to scold and condemn those who took an active part in trying to undermine the votes of the American people. It was a speech marred by his problems with his voice, but I think true to his spirit, that he wants to call on that decency, on that strength of character, to get him over this divisive moment in our history, if possible. If he treats them fairly, he thinks he should be treated fairly. We'll see how that goes.
We sure will. Terry Moran, thanks so much. I wanted to pick up on a point from Terry and bring that to you, Rick Klein. As much of it seemed like this was an olive branch, it also seemed like an attempt to legitimize his victory with the American people and really to kind of explain point by point as far as why. Does he now get to finally kind of put this to bed and use this as a pivot point to get right back out on the campaign trail tomorrow in Georgia, where the balance of the power in the Senate hangs in the balance?
Yeah, Lindsay, this was an attempt to reclaim the mandate that Joe Biden believes, and I think the American people confirmed, that he won more than a month ago. The mandate that President Trump famously called a landslide, that same precise margin of victory in the Electoral College, and to take that forward. And to my mind, Lindsay, this was Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, serving notice that there are limits to the patience that he's going to have, limits to how much he is going to bend over to the Republican Party to show the goodwill and the good faith. So much of his election was based on a contradiction, which was that, yes, I can beat Donald Trump, this enormously divisive president, but I need to do it with you. And I understand you, including many Republicans, and where you come from. Tonight, you heard him call them out and say, look, I understand where they're coming from, calling out also the ones who stood with him, the elected officials who certified this election result, particularly in red states. That, to me, is critical. And yes, as he puts on a political hat tomorrow, campaigns in Georgia, tries to win control of the Senate, to me, this is a signal that Joe Biden intends to play some political hardball. He knows where you stood before. And he's also watching very carefully to see even those tiny cracks, the few senators who come out today and say, yes, Joe Biden is the president-elect. To me, that's significant. Even if there's only a few of them, even if there isn't a stampede of Republicans, there are enough who are recognizing the realities of the situation that Joe Biden can build on. He knows so many of those lawmakers, knows so many of those senators from his time serving alongside them, and those are the ones he needs to govern with. And I think in some sense he's saying there are a lot of Republicans out there that are just going to be irreconcilables. They're not people they're going to be able to deal with, the people that are dead enders for Donald Trump, but there are many others, including many of the viewers tonight who may not have voted for him, that he thinks he can work with. And as he now embarks on more of a political exercise, and now as he begins to prepare more urgently for taking office about a month from now, I think he's thinking about this all a little differently and presenting himself as president-elect a little differently tonight.
Rick, Terry, Rachel, our thanks for your analysis tonight.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.